All right.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
It's Zajac for me when I brought an ERUVIN with me.
I think it's
Mazel tov on the siyum. Thank you.
all right, Chevra, Freilach. Here we go. This is good. With the help of Hashem, we are starting a new Masechta, Masechtas ERUVIN. We are dedicating this opening with a refuah shalema to Harav Adin ben Nifkaleya. That's Rabbi Steinsaltz. May he have a refuah shalema. Speaking about him, it's very helpful to be using his Gemara or other Gemaras that have a lot of pictures, illustrations that really, really facilitate learning this entire Masechta, making it something that some might consider challenging into something really relatively easy, because a lot of the challenges that ERUVIN brings is not challenges of Sfara, which is always challenging and always geschmack throughout the entire Shas, but a lot of it is because people, because they don't see the picture, they don't have clarity into what we are speaking about. And thank God in the later generations, in our generation, and giving Rabbi Steinsaltz the due kavod and credit, it really became a lot easier. The word ERUVIN is a plural of the word eruv. The word eruv in English probably would mean to merge. And al pi Hasidus, as we spoke out very bekitzerdik when we finished Shabbos, that the Rebbe explains that the beginning of Masechta Shabbos speaks about Hoitzah. Al pi Nigla we learn to Toisves, Malachi Gerua. But the concept of Hoitzah is that if a person is Mechalal the Shabbos, so then they take themselves out of the Rishus of the Yachid, of the Yechidah Shaloylam. And the goal of the Masechta was to learn how to be Shomer Shabbos, and ultimately the last din in the Mishnah was in order to v'koishrin, to become reconnected to become bound with Hashem, and really to show how Hashem and godliness connects everything, because everything is really part of the Eibishter. The Hemshech Lozeh, we can say, is the concept of ERUVIN. We're going to be learning about, especially in the beginning, about the dinam of a mavui, certain things that when we do it, we render a location into a Rishus Hayachid, which is the goal to show how really the entire world is in the Rishus of the Yechidah Shaloylam. Now, a couple of just general introductions. First of all, the layout of the way people used to live was that people lived in homes as we live today, but it was very common that various homes opened up to one chutzner, into one courtyard. And then you would have various chatzerim, or various chatzeiros, batim chatzeiros, that would open up into a mavui. A mavui is some sort of private, I don't like to use the word alleyway, because today in America, when you think about an alleyway, you think about something like secondary, like there's a street, but there's an alleyway. The word cul-de-sac is a better image of a mavui, because this was the way people lived. So you had a Reshus HaRabim, right, a big main street. The Reshus HaRabim went into a Mavui. From the Mavui, you went into the Chatzar, and then from your Chatzar, you went into your house. Now, reviewing some of the dinim, and we'll have many more opportunities to review more details. By the Torah, there are only two types of halachic domains, midin Torah, Reshus HaRabim, Reshus HaYachid. The definition of a Reshus HaRabim, L'Kula Alma, is an area that has 16 amas of width. A Reshus HaRabim is an area that is not covered. There's no roof on top of it. According to almost all of the Tanoim, as long as it is open from both ends, right, aside of the Tana Rebbe Yehuda that we learned about in Shabbos, if it's open from both ends, even if there are walls on the sides, it's considered a Reshus HaRabim. And according to some, and this is really a big machlekes rishonim going all the way into halacha, it might need to be connected somehow to 600,000 people. This in itself is very nuanced. Does it mean that 600,000 people have to travel on it every day? Does it mean that 600,000 people have to live in the city and they have access to this thoroughfare, to this road, to this highway? So it's servicing 600,000 people. But so holds somebody Shainim that you need to have this condition as well. Now, in many cases, you have a public thoroughfare, but one of the above conditions are not there. Like, for example, it's not 16 amas wide, it's 15 amas wide. Okay, then that becomes a domain, a rabbinic domain known as a karmelis. So we'll review more details about that later. And Reshus HaYachid, which is a biblical domain, is very clearly defined. It's an area that is enclosed by mechitzas, and the concept of mechitzas is very relevant to the opening of our MASSECHTA. All right, according to most opinions, and we will go by that even if it is not enclosed with mechitzas from all four sides, we're speaking now min ha-Torah, if it's enclosed with mechitzas three sides, then and the area inside is 4 by 4 tfachim or more, that is a biblical Reshus HaYachid. However, as we'll see, if it's not enclosed by all four sides, then rabbinically, as we're going to start learning about the case of a mavui, it will be problematic. So what's the mavui? The mavui, really, there's a mavui mefoilish or a mavui mefulash. There's a mavui that's opened in both ends. That's not the mavui that we are speaking about in the beginning of our Masechta. We're speaking about a mavui sasum. A enclosed mavui means it's closed from three sides with walls, which means that mido eiraisa, it's a bona fide Reshus HaYachid. And we're speaking about a case that it opens up into a biblical Reshus HaRabim. All right, so it's very clear. In the Reshus HaRabim, one may not carry something for 4 amas. In the Reshus HaYachid, in the Mavi, one is allowed to carry. But the Chachamim did not want us, if a Mavi is just simply open to the Reshus HaRabim, to allow people to carry in the Mavi. Why not? Because since it goes straight into the Reshus HaRabim, a person should carry something from the Mavi into the Reshus HaRabim. All right, there are other nuances of other Rishonim, but that's enough just to get the general issue. So what needs to happen? We have to make some sort of heked. We have to do something at the opening of this Mavi Sasum in order for people to remember and to see, this is where the Mavi ends, and that is where the Reshus HaRabim begins. So that's what we're talking about. Now, really, we have 3 options that we'll be dealing with a lot. There is what we will call a lechi. A lechi means you put up a side post. It's a post that goes up vertically. All right. The post has to have at least 10 tfachim height, and the post has to be within 3 tfachim of the entrance of the mavui. It means you can't put it deep into the mavui. The side post also has to be within 3 tfachim from the ground. As you remember, we learned the din of lavud. Doesn't have to be touching the ground, but it has to be within 3 tvachim of the ground. That's option number 1, lechi. Option number 2, another instrument, lebeis hillel. Option number 2, lebeis shammai, you need to have this and that, is a koira. A koira is a crossbeam. A crossbeam is something that has to have also a minimum width of 1 tefach, and it pashut goes across the opening from side to the other side, And according to Beis Hillel, either a lechi or a koida is enough to render now the mavi an area in which you can carry. Now, there's another very important part to this equation, and that's not something that we'll be speaking about right now. And that is that even if you have the lechi and or the koida, or the tzuras HaPesach, as we'll speak out in a moment. Nevertheless, if you have various chatzeiros that open up into a mavui, then one will not be allowed to take something from the chatzer to the mavui, because we already mentioned this again, just to review, that midrabanan, you cannot carry from a reshus hayachid that is under one type of ownership into a reshus hayachid that has another ownership. So the chatzeiros, like everyone has the right in the mavui. If you have two chatzeiros opening up into the mavui, everyone has a right in the mavui. But in each given chatzer, only the people who have homes have the right in that chatzer. So the ownership of the chatzer and the ownership of the mavui is not the same. Some people share, but some people don't. So that's another whole issue of making a shituf muvais, which will allow you to carry from the chatzer to the mavui, and that's not what we're talking about right now. We are just simply focusing is that even though the mavi sasum, let's go, is midayrais and reshus hayachid, you are allowed to carry in a reshus hayachid. Just don't carry into the street, don't carry into the reshus harabim. Being that it's open to it, you have to put a lechi or a koida. Now, the third item that we're not going to be speaking here in the Mishnah about in the beginning is what we call as a tzuras HaPesach. Now, tzuras HaPesach is on both sides a side post and a mashkoif on top of it. Now, the beauty of a tzuras HaPesach is that unlike the koida, unlike the lechi that we spoke about, minimum shiurim, right? It has to have X amount of thickness. By the way, the lechi doesn't need to have thickness, but it has to have a minimum height. And you have the koida has to have a tefach of thickness. If you are making a tzuras HaPesach, then the string on the top can be a string. And many people, when they hear the word eruv, they think about the ERUVIN that we have in many of these larger cities. And we all know that no one puts beams, crossbars that have a tefach with. We put a rope because we use an instrument known as a tzuras HaPesach, both sides and a covering. There, it can be more flimsy. Our Mishnah is b'chlal not speaking about the tzuras HaPesach. Our Mishnah is going to open up speaking about using a koida. Now, what is the issue of our Mishnah? It's a very simple issue. And we have this parallel. We have this in MASSECHTA Shabbos for lighting of the Menorah, and we're going to have this soon in MASSECHTA Sukkah. Is there a maximum height upon which we say that if the crossbar was put higher than that, it doesn't serve its function? Let's say that it's there to remind us to see, here's where it ends. If it's that high up, you're not going to see it. And just like, yes, in Sukkah, we have this concept that the schach has to be within the 20 amas, and not higher than 20 amas. So our Mishnah opens up with the machlokes tanoim, the Tanakama Chachamim versus Rebbe Yehuda. The Chachamim, as they say in Sukkah, hold that if the koira was placed higher than 20 amas from the floor, it doesn't function. You have to bring it down. Versus the Tana Rebbe Yehuda that doesn't subscribe to that. He doesn't have the 20 amas maximum height. Now, does he have a maximum height? We'll see about that extensively in the Gemara. So that's the first din in the Mishnah. And the second din in the Mishnah will be that even if the koida is 20 amas or lower, so it's good even according to the Chachamim, the opening to the mavui also is only considered an opening if it has a maximum width. If it goes beyond the maximum width, then we call that a pirza, a breach in a mechitza. And if it's breached, then it's not good. So what's the width that is tolerable that we say, this is only called an opening. It's not called a breach, 10 amas. So if it's 10 amas and you have a koida, you're good. If the opening to the mavui is more than 10 amas, then you have to fence it off. And as we'll learn later details that in most cases, when you fence it off, you don't even have to put a koida or a lechi. The fence itself is like the reminder. These are the two dinim of the Mishnah, and the whole DAF will focus primarily upon one concept. And we're going to learn today, Shitas Rav. What does Rav say? Rav says that how does this koida work? Why does it work? So he says it works. It's not just about making a heket. Is that when you place a koira lechachamim within 20 amas, we'll see how high, if there is a height, and there is a height according to Rav in the Tanach Rebbe Yehuda, then you render the entrance into a Pesach. And therefore, think about something. When you have a mechitza, but in the mechitza you have a door. The door doesn't ruin the mechitza. It's a mechitza with a door in it. As long as there is a koira, that's the way Rav learns, it renders the whole entrance into a Pesach, into an entranceway. So it's ke'ilu taka closed off from all four sides. And the part that's facing the Rishus HaRabim has an entranceway which allows you to go in and to go out. So the koira functions mitzad din Pesach. That will be the nakuda of today's entire DAF. Okay, with many other details as we will God really learn inside. So with tremendous joy, Chavre, let's open up an ERUVIN. We're going to DAF Beis, Amud Aleph, all the way in the top, starting with the Holy Mishnah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol nihiyeh b'dvarim. So Mavoi, we're learning about a Mavoi Sasum. Biblically, it's a Rishus HaYachid Farvas because it's closed from all three sides with mechitzas. Now, don't forget, those mechitzas open up. You have entranceways into a chatzah, seder. But if you have a picture, you'll see what we're talking about clearly. It's completely open to the Rishus HaRabim. And the Rabbeinu HaKadosh, Kedarke HaKadosh, is not giving the introduction ala seder. You have to put a lechi or put a koira, make it Surah Pesach. We have to know all that. He's already speaking about a Mavoi Sasum that has a koira. The question here is, how high was the koira placed? So Mavoi Shehu refers to the crossbeam. Gavoya, the Bach takes out the words Lamailo. Gavoya Ma'asim Amma. There's a koira there that goes from one side to the other side. It has the minimum tefach width. It's a proper koira, but it's placed too high. Zajac the Tanakama, which is Shitas Chachamim Yima'ed. Yima'ed means you have to lower it. If you don't lower it, then even though again Midrash it's a Rishus HaYachid, but you may not now carry in the Mavoi. Let's use the words because then you may inadvertently carry out from the Mavoi into the Rishus HaRabim. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, ain't it tzarich. I don't subscribe to that maximum height. And as we mentioned in the intro, does he hold there is any maximum height or I don't care how high it is. Next din number 2 in the Mishnah. What about the opening itself? How wide is the opening? So says the Mishnah that the harachav me'eser amos, if the entrance is wider than 10 amos, then I don't care that you have a koira. It does not work. Yema'et, you have to decrease the width by putting up a fence. And like we mentioned, we learned this in the Gemara, that in most cases, when you put such a fence, it takes the place of the lechi, of the koira, of the tzuras pesach, and you're good to go. Now, does the Rebbe Yehuda argue with that? In our Mishnah, we don't see. We'll see about that in the Gemara. But if you have the instrument known as a tzuras pesach means that you're putting up something on both sides and something on top of that. So then, says the Mishnah, even though the width is more than 10 amos, there's no need to decrease the width. Good. Says the Gemara, we're going to see that we have mamish, a parallel machlokes in Masechta Sukkah regarding the height. There it's by the schach. Tanach we learned in Sukkah DAF Beis. That Sukkah shehi gavoy l'mayla me'asim amo zok the Tanakama zok the Chachamim psula. And Rabbi Yehuda, like here, over there, he's machshir. So now that we established that it's taka parallel, the question is, why did the Rebbe formulate the words of the Mishnah very differently? And over here, it doesn't say mavi shu l'mayla asara, or take out the word l'mayla like the Bach. It doesn't say psula. What does the Mishnah say? Yema'et. What is Yema'et? It's solution oriented. It's takana oriented. Here we're speaking about how to rectify it. By the way, the Mishnah there could have said the same thing, that if the schach, according to the Tanakh, is higher than 20 amas, bring it down, Yema'et. So why are we emphasizing the psul there, and why are we emphasizing the tikkun over here? Answers the Gemara. Sukkah, which is the Oiraisa. And like Rashi explains, before Rabbi wrote the Mishnah, everyone already knew about the dinim of a sukkah. Okay? Everyone knew Zajac has to be max 20 amas. Rabbi, who wrote the Mishnah, wanted to write it very clearly. You know the general rules. You should know that if you didn't put it within 20 amas, if it's higher than 20 amas, p'tanipsu. Mavui, don't forget that Midai Raisa, you don't have to put anything in the entranceway of a Mavui. A Mavui is a bona fide biblical Rishus HaYachid. So Rebbe has to notify you what you need to do. You don't know yet what you need to do. So therefore, Tani Takanta, like Rashi says, what exactly should have Rebbe said? Rebbe should have says that if you don't adhere to the rabbinic rule, it's invalidated. We don't know the rabbinic rule. So this is where he's writing the rule. When you write the rule, you don't write, and if you don't keep to it, it's possible. That's step number 2, because there are certain rules, by the way, that are called lechatchilas. But first you have to give the rule. Then you have to make a second step. If you don't keep the rule, by the way, both by Sukkah and by here, it's possible. But by Sukkah, everyone knew the rule. Here, it's like a new rule. So here we are introducing the rule, make it 20 amas and lower. That's what the Rebbe does over here. So learns Rashi in the first answer of the Gemara, that Doraisa Nami Tani Takanto. Really, we're positive thinking. We are solution-oriented thinkers. Even in Sukkah, even though everyone knew already, it should be 20 amas. And Rebbe is coming to tell you that it's possible. There also, Rebbe theoretically would have written the Takanta, which also makes it clear that you have to do it. If it's the Zajac is above 20, you got to lower it down. Eloma, Sukkah, Zakti Gemara, since the Nefishin Milei, there are many details in our Mishnah. The Mishnah speaks about the height of the Zajac, the numbers of the walls, Rashi says, the din that the walls have to have at least a height of 10 tefachim, the law that the Zajac has to be that thick that it's providing more shade. There's more shade in the Sukkah than sunlight. So the Rebbe is writing all these laws together. Now, if any one of these laws are missing, then the solution is make the walls higher, add to the Zajac, right? Put another wall, lower the Zajac. No, there's too many, it becomes too complicated. Since the Nefishin Milei, pasik v'tani psula, because there's a beauty in uniformity. Rebbe wrote a bunch of rules, and on all of the rules that we just mentioned, that Rashi reminded us of, if you didn't keep to them, then the Sukkah is possible. So it's uniform. The solution for each problem is different. If the Zajac is too high, the solution is to lower it. If the problem is that it's not that dense, the solution is to add to Zajac. So the Rebbe didn't want to write so long. But over here, in this Mishnah, there's only 2 dinim. And it's not many dinim. So Hitaka writes the solution for both. If the koira is above 20 amas, lower it. If the width is beyond 10 amas, decrease it. Based on the rule that you should teach in a lashon that's more katzir, and more importantly here, it should be more uniform. Okay. Now we are starting with the first approach. Why is it? What's behind this machlokes of the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda here by the Mavui? And indeed, why is it that they're arguing about the 20 amas? Where does that come from? So Amar Rabbi Yehuda is introducing here Amar Rav Shitas Rav. Chachamim, meaning our Tanakama, Loi Limadua Elam Ipischoi Shel Ulam. What we are accomplishing by putting up a koira is that we are creating a Pesach. And the beauty of a Pesach is that when you have a Pesach in an entranceway, it's not mevatel the mechitza. Having a Pesach allows us halachically to view this entire fourth side as being a mechitzed side with an opening. The question is, how large does an opening where it's still just an entranceway? But then there has to be a point that if it's even bigger than that, in our case now taller than that, it's not a Pesach. It's not an entranceway. It's a pirza, it's a breach. So where do we find Pesachim? So we find Pesachim by the Beis HaMikdash. So what was the size of a Pesach? So let's look at the Heichel, says the Tanakama. The entrance to the Heichel, as we'll see, was 20 amas tall, and it's called a Pesach. Beautiful. Rabbi Yehuda says, let's go to the Beis HaMikdash. Unlike the Mishkan, where we went from the chatzit straight into the oil moed. In the Beis Hamikdash, you went from the chatzit of the Azara, you went into the antechamber. The entrance to the antechamber was double the height and double the width than the entranceway to the Heichal. And the Tran, as we learned in Midrash, Pischai Shel Heichal, Gavoya Esrem Amma, 20 amas tall, Gurachvay Esed amas and 10 amas width. The Shel Ulam, the entranceway to the antechamber. So if you're going Mimizrach Lamairav, you would go first into the Ulam. There, much bigger. And that's also called the Pesach. Now, furthermore, adds Rav, they were both expounding the same verse. A pasuk Chevra in Chumash, Vayikra, Parshas Vayikra, regarding the carbon shlamim, where the Torah says, Ushachatoi Pesach oil moed, that a carbon has to be slaughtered, Pesach oil moed. Now, don't forget, that pasuk is speaking about the Mishkan, but we're going to right away apply it to the Mikdash. The Rabbanan hold Kedushas Heichal L'chod U Kedushas Ulam L'chod. We do not view the Ulam as a extension of the Heichal, and therefore, when the Torah says Pesach Oyel Moed, what was the Oyel Moed in the Beis Hamikdash? The Kodesh, the Heichal, and it Pesach Oyel Moed. So what's the Pesach? 20 by 10. The Chik says Pesach Oyel Moed Heichal Ksif. However, Rabbi Yehuda holds, this is the first approach, that you can say that the Heichal and the Ulam are considered one Kedusha. We can view the Ulam as an extension of the Heichal if you're going from west to east. So it's an extension of the Heichal. And therefore, when the Torah says that things have to happen, Pesach, Oyel Moed, it doesn't only mean the Heichal, but if the Ulam is an extension of, it also includes the Ulam. Atrava Yehuda Ksif. So therefore, we find that even if something has a height of 40 amas, it's still called a Pesach. Now we already get some more clarity. According to this approach, that the Koira is in order to render the entranceway into a halachic Pesach, even though Rabbi Yehuda allows it higher than 20, but he has a limit. According to this, what will be the limit? According to what we're learning right now, 40. Then it's called a Pesach. Okay. Says the Gemara, the Iba Yiseva, even if you're going to say, the nuance, that Rabbi Yehuda also says that Kedushas Ulam is not considered the same as Kedushas Eichel, so the Ulam is not viewed as an extension of, nevertheless, the Rabbi Yehuda, you can't quote the pasuk in Vayikra by the Shlamim, Pesach Oyel Moed. Pesach Oyel Moed goes to the Heichal, but you have a pasuk that writes, the Chsiv El Pesach Ulam Habayis. You see, Ulam. Ulam is the antechamber. Now, Tosfos does the legwork for us. Tosfos in his mind went through the whole Nach, or the whole Tanach, and there is not one place where you have Pesach Ulam Habayis. You love it. So guys, let's learn the first Tosfos that we're learning together in the MASSECHTA, the third Tosfos in the Amid. By the Chsiv, El Pesach Ulam Habayis, Zok Tosfos Zeh HaPasuk Einle B'Shul Makim. So what is the Gemara talking about? The words Ulam Habayis. And that's in the Yecheskel Mem. The Kra Achrina is Absnatas Hasmiches. It's 7 prakim later. In Yecheskel Mem Zayin, it says Pesach Habayis. So Vahava Ke'ilu Nichta Behedya B'chad Kra Pesach Ulam Habayis. Okay. So you have, we're looking for anywhere where the word Pesach, which is a halachic status, is in reference to the Ulam. You got it? The Rabbanan. Now, Tosfos already has to work out what's even the question on the Rabbanan. It's not even a pasuk, so Tosfos works that out. But let's go in the Gemara. The Rabbanan, you have a kasav, or you have a ksiv, El Pesach Ulam. If the word Pesach would have been written next to the word Ulam, is good. And it's not, right? Because we have the words Ulam Habayis. The word Pesach is written like we learned in Tosfos mamash later. Pesach Habayis. Nowhere does it say Pesach Ulam. It's Kiddush Amrat. So that's about Pesach Ulam Habayis, even though we'll put it all together. So it means El Pesach Ulam Habayis. It means Habayis Pasuach LaUlam. What is that Pesach referring to? If it says Pesach Ulam Habayis. So let me just word it like this. The Chachamim they are traveling from west to east, from west to east. If you're traveling from west to east, so when it says El Pesach Ulam Habayis, what is the Pesach referring to? To the Ulam. It's going on the Ulam. I'm sorry, it's going on the bias. If you go from west to east, it means the Ikar is the west is the holier. The more west you go, the holier it is. So the Pesach is going on the Heichel. If you are looking at the Beis HaMikdash traveling from east to west, then if you go, then the entrance goes from the Azara into the Ulam, which later goes into the bias. So that's going to be the key in Machlokes over here. And that's very meaningful, B'kitzur, just al pi Kabbalah, that we know that west is the concept of Yusoid, and east is the concept of Tiferes in the directions. So which way are we traveling? Are we going Yusoid Tiferes? Or are we going Tiferes Yusoid? Are we going Milmaila Lamato, the Seder of the Spheres, Milmaila Lamato, or are we going Milmato Lamaila? That's really the underlying machlekes, whether the Pesach is referring to the bias or referring to the Ulam. And why is that very significant? There's a famous approach of the Rebbe that points out the machlekes Rambam and Ramban as to what's the ikar of the whole Beis HaMikdash. Is the ikar, like the Rambam writes, the avodah sakarbanos, the avodah milmata lomayla? Maybe that's connected to this. So then when we're looking at the whole Beis HaMikdash, we are going from east to west, milmata lomayla, Tiferes Yisoid, Yisoid Tiferes, we're going up in the spheres. Or, like the Ramban says, that the ikar of the Mishkan is the inyan of bringing the Shechina down, going Milmaila Lamata. When you go down the spheres, first you hit Tiferes, and then you go into Midas HaYisoid. Let's go back over here. I don't understand the whole thing. Okay, I got it. You found me a pasuk you put together. You caught a pasuk from Shlomim. Right, Ushachatoi, Pesach, Oyel Moyed. That pasuk, my friends, is Bechlal not speaking about the Beis HaMikdash. You know what the problem is? The problem is that in the Mishkan, in the pasuk in Vayikra, you know how tall was the entrance? 10 amas. That's a Gavaldik Akasha. You're telling, it's about the Chachamim. No, they go, it's only the Pesach, not of the Ulam, of the Heichel. Why? Go to the pasuk. The pasuk is using the word Pesach, Oyel Moyed, 10 amas tall. The Mishnah should have said that if the koira is above 10 amas, you got to lower it. Answers the Gemara, Ashkechon, that Mishkan, sometimes the Ikre Migdash, Ikre Mishkan, they are interchangeable. So that's your answer. We have to say that they are interchangeable. Shlomim sheshachatan koydem sichas dal sois ha'heichal ar psulim. It's not only in the Mishkan, but in the Beis HaMikdash. If they shechted the Shlomim before the Heichal was opened up, they are pasul. Shedemar ushachatei pesach oyel moyed. In other words, what does that mean? That bisman shepsuchim v'loy bisman shehem neulen. Now, I don't understand the whole limud of Shmuel. You're quoting me a pasuk regarding the Mishkan. No, Shmuel made a statement that in the Beis HaMikdash, if you shlechted the Shlamim before the doors were open. But the pasuk, the source is the Mishkan, and you are applying it to the Beis HaMikdash. As an ayah, that what is written on one automatically means the other. The Mishkan, the Oyel Moyed, really means the Heichel. Says the Gemara, Ela Ashkechan Migdash, that sometimes is referred to as Mishkan. No, it's Mishkan means Migdash. Mishkan, the Ikra Migdash. El Ashkechan, the Gemara says, Migdash, the Ikra Mishkan, or Mishkan, the Ikra Migdash. Bishleim says the Gemara, Migdash, the Ikra Mishkan. Indeed, as it says, and we're quoting a pasuk in Bichul Koisai, Venosati es Mishkani b'soichichem, I will place my Mishkan amongst you. Now, who said this pasuk Bichul Koisai? So who's speaking here? Moshe Rabbeinu. He said this pasuk when we already had a Mishkan. And what is he promising us? That I will place my Mishkan with you. What do you mean, I will place? It was already there. Muzman Zagin, that this Mishkan means the Beis HaMikdash. So here clearly you see, and that the Beis HaMikdash wasn't built yet. And we're getting a promise, Bizman HaMidbar, that then I will place the Mishkan, meaning the Mikdash amongst you. So the word Mishkan means Mikdash. Ela Mishkan, the Ikra Mikdash min Alon, and Ilema, Midach 7 part in the Bahaloischa. The Nasu'u, Hakohasim, Noisei HaMikdash, The Kohasim were not. The Gatin Pasuk is speaking about the Mishkan. That's like a great proof. That Beis and Beis says, "Come on, it's no proof at all because Ahu, yeah, we were in the Midbar, but maybe the reason why the Torah uses the word Migdash is because the Kohasim, unlike the other two, of their sub-tribe members, the Kohasim were the ones that carried the holiest of the Klei Kodesh, including the Aron. What do we call the Aron? We call it the Aron Kodesh. Ahu ba'aron ksiv. Zok the top Rashi. Ahu ba'aron ksiv. Shehu masa b'nei kahas. Ba'al shem. Shehu mekudesh. Mishara masois kari migdosh. So that's not a raya. Hello. Pashit. Go to the beginning. When it says in Truma, Va'asu li migdosh. V'shachanti b'soicham. We all know that what was the first time that we fulfilled this mitzvah when we built the Mishkan. The building of the Mishkan is the fulfillment of Asuli Migdash. So you see these words are interchangeable. Okay. So in other words, says the Gemara, Bein l'Rabbanon or Bein l'Rabbi Yehuda, all Rav, everything, the concept of a koira is to render that part into a Pesach, which really means that we view it as if there is a mechitza, and this is a door in the mechitza. So he says, if we learn it mi Pesach, so leil for mi Pesach shara chotzer, the second din we learned in the Mishnah, and by the way, in the Mishnah, we didn't even record Chitas Rabbi Yehuda, but we clearly recorded two dinim in the Mishnah, the height of the koira, and b'chlal, the width of the entrance. And the Mishnah said that the width of the entrance has to be 10 amas and not more. But hold on, if we want for us to have a din of a Pesach, the chotzer in the Mishkan. Now it's interesting that the Torah doesn't tell us how wide was that opening, but we will deduce that the opening of the courtyard, when you were in the midbar and you entered the courtyard, the azara, the entrance was bigger than 10 amas. As it says that oirech hechotzer meya ba'ama, v'roichav chamishim chamishim. The length of the chotzer, that means the northern wall, that means the southern wall was 100 amas long. The roichav, which means the western wall and the eastern wall, and you would enter from the eastern wall, it occupied a space of 50 chamishim. B'chamishim. The koima, guys, we're using the simple taich. L'choyret means the height of the walls. We're speaking about the curtains that went around the area of the Mishkan was 5 amas. That's the simple taich. We're going to correct this in a moment. And it says now, how big was the opening? No one entered from the western side. No one entered from the north. We're speaking about the Mishkan. No one entered from the south. The entrance was from the east. We went from east to west. Now, how large was the width? So it says, "V'chamesh esrei amos kiloyim lakosef." That's the pasuk, and there's going to be 15 amas of curtains for one shoulder. Now, guys, if we said it's 50, it's 50 width. Let's teach that a shoulder means a side, like by a person. So if it's 15 amas one side, that there is a curtain, and as we'll see now, the next pasuk yiksiv ulakosev hashenis. Again, Kloim Chamesh Esrei Amo. It means that the width of the curtain that wrapped around from the northern wall, from the southern wall into the west, into the eastern side, was 15 amas. So I'm asking you, if you have a total width of 50 amas, and you had from the 50 amas on each side 5 amas of curtain that closed it off, 15 and 15 is 30. So l'chora, how large was the width of the entrance that was open? L'chora 20. So why did our Mishnah say that it has to have a width of 10 and not more? For sure, that's the sheet of the Chachamim. Why? L'Yurav say it's all about Pesach. The Torah calls it Pesach Shara Chotzer. Pesach, even though it's more than 10 amas. That's a Gavaldik Akash. So why don't we say Mala Halon? Now you can counter. You can counter is that our Mishnah is speaking about the koira that's 20 amas high. Maybe if it's 20 amas high, it can't be 20 amas wide. In the Mishkan, the way we touched the pasuk, the curtains were tall 5 amas. Okay, So at least let us say that if the height is only of 5 amas, then we allow a width of 20 amas. Why don't we say malahalan in the entrance of the chatzir of the Mishkan? Chamesh, if the height was 5, even though there was a width of 20 amas that was open, the Torah calls it Pesach Shara Chatzir. Afkan, the Mishnah should have given us at least that detail. That when you have to diminish the width of the opening, if it's very tall, if the Torah is very tall. But if the whole walls going into the Mavi are only 5 amos, or if the Koira is placed 5 amos off the ground, Afkan Chamesh, the Koira is Chamesh, then we should allow up to 20 amos. That's a Gemara Kekash. So answers the Gemara, Pesach, Shar, HaChatzir Ikra. You're right. Shot number 1, you're right. The curtains were 5 amos tall. You're right that 15 amos on one side, towards the north, 15 amas towards the south. Zolzain. 20 amas were opened. But what does the Torah call it? The Torah doesn't call it the Pesach. It calls it the Pesach of the Chatzir. Pesach stome lo yikra. And it's not a Pesach. And therefore, if it's not a Pesach, it won't function. You're bachlal not understanding the pasuk correctly. When the Torah says there was 15 amas on each shoulder, that is not referring to the width. No, it's referring to the height. The height of the curtains, that separated the midbar to the inner part of the area of the Mishkan, was 15 amas tall, and even on the Mizrach side, the side in which you entered, the curtains, they were also 15 amas tall. So why do we think about the challenges? Goiva. 15 goes to the height. No, the Torah doesn't say clearly. The koima chamesh amas. Koima is the height. The height was 5, not 15. Says you want to know, you don't understand what that means. Hahu misfas misbeach will go with that girsa ulamaylam. Guys, we know that the misbeach was 10 amas tall. Even though the pasuk gives a clear other number, it was 10 amas tall. We wanted that even when a kohen is standing on top of the misbeach, no one that's outside the Mishkan complex should see the kohen. So the pshat of chamesh amas means that the curtains were so tall that it was 5 amas above the height of the mizbeach. Mizbeach is 10 plus 5, bidiyuk, 15 amas. And that was to afford kahanim more tznius, a mountain of privacy. If you're not in the Mishkan, you don't see what's happening in the Mishkan at all. So go on. So you got two answers. Now, let's go by. So Rav is standing. The din of the Mishnah, the height and the machlokes has to do with the definition of a Pesach. Reb Yehuda, fragt die Gemara, mit Pischai shel Ulam Gamar. How can that be? You, Rav. Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah, second din of the Mishnah, the Harachav, me'eser amois, yemait, and Rabbeinu HaKadosh did not say that Rabbi Yehuda argues, v'loi palig Rabbi Yehuda, if it's all about Pesach, and Rabbi Yehuda understands that we can learn Pesach from the Pesach Ulam. And as we mentioned in Amud Aleph, the Pesach Ulam was 40 amas high, 20 amas wide. So Rabbi Yehuda should have allowed for the opening to the Mavui to be up to 20 amas. Nowhere does he write that. So Amar Abaya, indeed, Rabbi Yehuda Taka argues. And we find this in a Braisa. Polig the Braisa. The Tanya of Harachav Miyud Amas Yemai. These are the words that Rabbi wrote in the Mishnah. However, Rabbi Yehuda Oimer Einot Tzarech L'mayit. I fragt the Gemara, nice that he argues, but for Liflik bin Masnisim, this is a question on Rabbeinu HaKadosh. Why didn't you quote it? So the Gemara gives a very important klal that Polig big goiva v'wadin l'rachma. No, it's Rebbe wrote things very precisely, and this is especially Rav l'shitasoi. Rav explained to you why does Rabbi Yehuda say it can be above 20 amas? Because you should know that Rabbi Yehuda learns Pesach from Pesach of Ulam. It's all about Pesach. Automatically, you'll know that since the source of Rabbi Yehuda is Pesach Ulam, so it's self-understood that he also argues with the width. Now, Rabbi Yehuda mepischai shel Ulam gamar ve'hatanya. Mavoi, see, our Mishnah never gave you a maximum height like Rabbi Yehuda. Our Mishnah says that it can be 20 amas tall. But what about if it's 100 amas tall? What about if it's 50 amas tall? Listen to this, Braisa. Rabbi Yehuda machshir. Look at this. Men v'nu nama. Whenever a Tana says this or that number, that's a kasha. Make up your mind. So until 40 or 50, now the way we're learning it should only have been until 40. Furthermore, we learned another brayso taught by Bar Kapara that Rabbi Yehuda holds it can be up to 100 amas. Now, it's ironically, we're not asking from the Tani Bar Kapara because we can say 100 amas, that's a guzma. Bishleim Bar Kapara, you can have bechik. You can say it's a guzma. Really, it's 40. It can be very tall. But when you have Elul Rabbi Yehuda, right, that Rabbi Yehuda says 40 or 50, 40 or 50, my guzma. Bishleim Arboim, we're going to take out the words of Rabbi Yehuda. We're already speaking about Rabbi Yehuda, so it takes out the Bach. Bishleim Arboim, Gavan Pischei Shalula. Pocket fits, but nun, minolei. So l'chaura, this proves Rab. If you can tolerate 50, has nothing to do with the din of a Pesach. So Amar Rab Chizda, look at this. Ha masnisa atesei l'Rav. You know what? The Rav learned a brayso, and the brayso misled Rav. Rav made a mistake when he said that Rabbi Yehuda learns it mipischei shalula. Hold on. What brayso made Rav think that? Because the Tanya, this is really a Tosefta. Mavi should give michaf amo. If a mavi is higher than 20 amas, and here the brayso adds higher mipischei shel heichal. Nice. Now we are being Megalo Soy. Where did Rav get this whole concept that this din of the height of the koida has to do with the din of an entranceway from this Tosefta? But this is explaining the Chachamim. Here, in other words, you get the word that if it's higher, mipischei shel heichal, which was 20 amas tall, you got to bring it down. So Rav is right. It's clear that the reason for the Chachamim's koida's height of up until 20 and not higher is because the Chachamim learned that the koida functions midin Pesach. Why? Because by the Olam we find a Pesach up until 20, meaning that's where do we find the height of a Pesach from the Heichel. So Rav went ahead, according to Rab Chizda, who saw that since the Rabbanon learn it midin Pesach, Elama they say Pesach, go to the Heichel. So Rabbi Yehuda says that's the way Rav made a mistake. Even Rabbi Yehuda also holds that a koida functions midin Pesach. Elama, I have another Pesach, and I'm allowed to learn it from that other Pesach, and he learns it from the Pischei Shalula. That's what Rav thought. But really, says Rab Chizda, you're partially right. You're partially right. You're right that Rabbi Yehuda, like the Chachamim, learned that the koida functions midin Pesach. Narvas then, Rabbi Yehuda B'chlal doesn't need to find any source in Tanach, anywhere where the word Pesach is referring to such an entranceway that was X tall. Doesn't need that. The Chachamim need that. And the Chachamim needed Dafke, like we learned in Amud Aleph. Pesach Oyel Moyed. Oyel Moyed is like 10 amas tall, but Mishkan and Migdash are interchangeable. In the Beis HaMikdash, the Heichal, which is B'makim Oyel Moyed, was 20 amas tall. Rabbi Yehuda says, don't look in the scripture. A king, Bisman, how big, look at the biggest palace of your times. And since Milachim, kings, when they build palaces, the Meshuggah, they build big entranceways. And sometimes a Meshuggah and a king can build a palace with a door that's 100 amas tall, or that's 50 amas tall. That Rabbi Yehuda mipischei demalkin gamar. And therefore, it's not connected to the ulam. According to Rab Chizda, who argues with Rav. But you should know, it is that Rav will hold, that Rabbi Yehuda will hold, he didn't have that brayso, that there is a maximum height of 40 amas. Okay, says the Gemara weiter, Mirabonon, I mipischei shel heichel gemiri, liboy dolosis keheichel. True that a Pesach is not a pirza. When you have a door, there's a mechitza with a Pesach in it. Hold on. If the source of we tolerate that height is from the Heichal, there were actual doors affixed to it. Alamatanan, Hechsher Mavui. According to Beis Shammai, we're going to have this Mishnah Daf Yud Aleph. You need both a lechi and a koida. According to Beis Hillel, it's a lechi or a koida. Nowhere do we say you have to have doors. But if it's midin Pesach, and you're learning the dimensions from Pesach Heichal, there should be doors. Answers the Gemara. The doors in the Heichal were not there to make that called a Pesach. A Pesach is an opening even if there are no doors. And just parenthetically, this concept, this back and forth, is very relevant. Halacha l'maisa midin mezuzah. Whether you're mechuyev mido oiraisa to put up a mezuzah only where there is an actual door, where you have mezuzahs and a mashkef, or not, you're mechuyev mido oiraisa. If you have mezuzahs and a mashkef with all the conditions you need to have to put up a mezuzah, you don't need a delis. You need to have a pesach, not a delis. That's over here. Elamato, yeah, we mentioned lechi. Now, we mentioned koira, but in our introduction, we said correctly that there's a third option. And the third option is called a tzuras HaPesach. And by the way, again, like I said, today we are very much familiar with the tzuras HaPesach because in ERUVIN that's being used, the word Eruv, as it's used commonly, the city has an Eruv, the instrument that's used is a tzuras HaPesach. So, it should not be effective. And by the way, the Mishnah mentioned this. The Mishnah says that even if the width is more than 10 amas, normally you might put up a fence. But then the Mishnah says if you have a tzuras HaPesach, then you're good. Why? The Heichal tzuras HaPesach Chaviloi. The Heichal had a tzuras HaPesach. There were two mezuzos and a mashkoif and a filo hache. Eser amas who did a viach. It was only 10 amas wide. Let me just explain the premise of this question. As we learned on Amud Aleph, the antechamber was 40 by 20. So now the question is, why was the Pesach to the Heichal half the size? Why? And the unspoken premise is, really it should have been the bigger the nicer. It would have been 40 by 20. They were mechuyev, they had to make it only 20 by 10 because they needed to have a Pesach. There's a din of Pesach, right? You have to shecht it, Pesach or moyet. It's based on the premise that if it would have been bigger, then it wouldn't be called a Pesach. And the Heichal needs to have a Pesach. Now the question is why? Why does it have to have a Pesach? Why don't we say, let it be as tall as you want it to be? By the fact that there was a tzuras HaPesach, that renders it into a Pesach. Is that why it doesn't? That means that even if you have a tzuras HaPesach, if it's wider than 10 amas, it's not called a halachic Pesach. So now we're back to a kasha. You have that say that the whole way that the koida, that the lechi, that the tikkun of the Mishnah is midin Pesach, and a tzuras HaPesach should not function. Allah Matanan, why did it say in our Mishnah, Im yesh tzuras HaPesach hafal pi shenoch av me'asad amas, ein tzarach l'mayet. The size of the Heichal's width is a proof that tzuras HaPesach would not have resolved if it would have been wider. Because if it would have resolved, the Taka would have left it wider. Why not leave it wider? Says the Gemara, Midi hutama el Rav. Hold on. Who told you that the dinim of our Mishnah has everything to do with the din of Pesach? We are learning today's DAF. It's all explaining Rav. Midin Pesach. You know something? Indeed. Masni law Rav Yehuda Lechia Barav in front of Rav when Rav Yehuda was teaching this Mishnah to someone else in front of Rav. He was reading the Mishnah the way we have it. That Einat Tzarech L'mayit. Rav underheard the way he's teaching the Mishnah, the way we had it, Ein Tzarech L'mayit, and he corrected him. No, you've fagreist. You have the wrong girsa. Asniye fakir. The Mishnah writes that even if there is a tzuras HaPesach, Tzarech L'mayit. That's beautiful. So we're leaving the premise that the opening of the Ulam was humongous. They would have theoretically wanted to leave that same size for the Heichal. Elama, you need to have a Pesach to the oil moed. A Pesach, for a Pesach, yeah, the max of Pesach is 10 by 20 or high 20 by 10. And a tzuras HaPesach wouldn't have helped because if it would have helped, they have a tzuras HaPesach there. And therefore, Taka, he had a different version in the Mishnah. Let's cop just one more line. Going into Daf Gimel. Elama ato, fragt die Gemara Daf Gimel. Loi seichane lei amaltira. A amaltira should not help for what? What are we talking about? Look inside the top. Rashi. Loi seichane lei amaltira la achshure devoyoi yoiser michaf. We're going to learn later that if the koida is above 20, if it has a amaltada, means that the koida has very visible projections coming from it. In other words, it chaps your eyes. It's very noticeable. It's normally noticeable even if it's placed higher than 20. And we'll learn later that if the koida has this amaltada, then it's good. Problem is, let's go back, based on the premise that really they would have wanted to leave the opening to the heichal as big as the ulam. They needed to make it small. 20 by 10 is not that small, but they needed to put it to that size because you need a din of a pesach to the oil moyet. Happens to be that the ulam had a amaltada, and we are assuming so did the heichal. And if you taka have a amaltada, if there was that to the heichal, then they could have made it taller than 20, and it still would have had a din of pesach. Amayla sohanali amaltada. The heichal, we are assuming that the heichal had a amaltada, even though we know that the ulam had it. And nevertheless, again, even though there was a amaltada, they had 20 amos tall. They didn't make it as tall as the ulam. Right? And not more, as we learned in Midrash, that there were 5 beautiful projections coming on the top where the mashkiv is made out of oak wood, a very beautiful wood, was al dabov. We are assuming it means on the heichel. Really, it was only on the ulam. Zulam ilam izu. Okay. So answers the Gemara. Bahai mai tiyufta. What do you think? You are refuting our whole base of Rab? No, you're not. Dilma kitanya hi. The amal terois was only ba'ulam tanya. We'll stop over here. Had there been amal terois by the opening of the heichal, then that would allow you to have a taller height and still keep the din pesach. But there were no such amal terois. So therefore, you have to have it 20 amos tall. But if you have a beautiful projection, then even if it's taller than 20 amos, you still retain the din of a Pesach. So that was a beautiful daf. So Rav learns the Mishnah midin Pesach. And the only question is, how much do you tolerate for an opening to be called an entranceway? And there's got to be a point where if it's that big, it's called a breach. And that's the machlokes between the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda, God willing, a lot more to be continued.
Koyach.
That's the whole ERUVIN. Ma'alo and waiting for ERUVIN. With the pictures, it's good. How's Rabbi Steinsaltz Zvika?
I haven't heard an update.
Rabbi, you should have warned us. It's hard to multitask with this Masechta.
No, it's not. It's not hard. No. I'm telling you, it's psychological. People think there was no svara that was difficult. Just a mistake.
No. I'm joking. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Great.
Thank you.